When we speak about strength after 60, the conversation must begin with a fundamental shift in how we understand nutrition. In youth, the body is forgiving. It tolerates excess, recovers quickly, and often masks the consequences of poor dietary choices. But with age, that margin for error narrows. Thoughtful. The body becomes more precise in its demands. It asks not for more food, but for better food. This is where many people misunderstand the equation. They assume that eating less is the solution. And while it is true that the body requires fewer calories as metabolism slows, what it truly requires is a higher density of nourishment. Emphatic. In other words, every bite must carry purpose. Every meal must justify its place in your body. Think of it this way. In your earlier years, you were running a system with excess capacity. Now, you are operating a system that values efficiency over abundance. The same plate of food that once fueled you may now burden you if it lacks nutritional value. Empty calories, those that are high in sugar, refined carbohydrates, and unhealthy fats, no longer pass through unnoticed. They accumulate, they inflame, and they quietly erode vitality. There is also a psychological dimension to this shift that we often ignore. Many of our eating habits are inherited from decades of routine, culture, and comfort. Food is not just sustenance, it is memory, identity, even emotional refuge. So when we say that nutrition becomes more important with age, we are not merely speaking about biology. We are speaking about the courage to reevaluate long-held patterns. This requires a certain intellectual honesty. One must ask, am I eating to nourish my body or simply to satisfy habit? That question, simple as it sounds, has profound implications. Because the body after 60 does not negotiate. It responds directly to what it is given. If you provide it with nutrients, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and antioxidants, it rewards you with energy, clarity, and resilience. If you neglect it, the consequences are equally direct. There is also a philosophical lesson embedded here. Aging, in many ways, is a process of refinement. It strips away excess and forces us to focus on what truly matters. Nutrition follows the same principle. It is no longer about indulgence or convenience. It becomes an act of discipline, even an act of respect. Respect for the body that has carried you through decades of life. And let us be clear, this is not about restriction in a negative sense. It is about intentionality. It is about choosing foods that serve you. Fresh vegetables, whole fruits, lean proteins, whole grains, foods that your body recognizes and utilizes efficiently. It is about understanding that nourishment is not measured by quantity, but by quality. When this shift occurs, something remarkable happens. Eating is no longer passive, it becomes purposeful. You begin to see food not as a source of temporary satisfaction, but as a tool for long-term strength. And that mindset, more than any single nutrient, is what sustains health in the later years of life. Because ultimately, the question is not how much you eat, but whether what you eat is worthy of the body you live in. When we begin to think seriously about strength after 60, we have to first confront a simple but often misunderstood reality. The body changes its rules. What worked at 40 does not work at 60, and what we could ignore in youth becomes impossible to overlook later in life. One of the most important of these changes is how the body relates to food. As we age, our metabolism naturally slows down. We require fewer calories to function, and yet, paradoxically, we need more nutrients than ever before. This creates a tension that many people fail to resolve. They continue eating in the same patterns they've followed for decades, assuming that less activity simply means eating slightly less of the same foods. But the body is not asking for less of the same. It is asking for something fundamentally better. At this stage of life, food is no longer just fuel. It becomes information. Every meal sends signals to the body, signals that either support healing, maintenance, and strength, or signals that promote inflammation, fatigue, and decline. And the body, especially after 60, responds with remarkable honesty. It no longer conceals the consequences. There is also a psychological layer to this that deserves attention. Eating habits are deeply ingrained. They are shaped by culture, family, comfort, and routine. routine. Many people are not simply eating food, they are preserving a version of themselves tied to earlier stages of life. So when we talk about improving nutrition, we are not just asking for dietary change, we are asking for a shift in identity. This is where clarity becomes essential. You have to ask yourself a difficult but necessary question. Is my current way of eating aligned with the life I want to live now? Not the life you lived 20 years ago, but the life you want today, one defined by independence, mobility, and mental clarity. Because the truth is, after 60, the margin for error becomes smaller. The body's ability to compensate weakens. Poor nutrition doesn't just go unnoticed. It accumulates. It shows up as low energy, reduced muscle strength, slower recovery, and increased vulnerability to disease. On the other hand, when you begin to prioritize nutrient-dense foods, those rich in vitamins, minerals, fiber, and essential proteins, you create the conditions for resilience. This is not about perfection or rigid control. It is about precision. It is about recognizing that each meal is an opportunity to either support or undermine your long-term health. And that awareness, once developed, changes the entire experience of eating. You begin to choose differently, not out of restriction, but out of understanding. There is also a deeper philosophical insight here. Aging, in many ways, is a process of becoming more intentional. The distractions of youth give way to a sharper awareness of consequences. Nutrition reflects this shift. It asks us to move from unconscious consumption to deliberate choice, from habit to awareness, from excess to purpose. And when that transition happens, something powerful takes place. You stop viewing food as a source of immediate gratification and start seeing it as an investment in your future self. Every plate becomes a quiet decision about the kind of life you are building. Because ultimately, strength after 60 is not determined by how much you eat, but by how wisely you choose what you eat, and whether your choices reflect the life you still intend to live. If we accept that nutrition becomes more important with age, then the next step is to understand what that nutrition should actually look like in practice. And this is where the idea of a balanced diet becomes essential, not as a slogan, but as a structured, deliberate approach to sustaining strength. A balanced diet is often misunderstood as a vague recommendation, something general and flexible to the point of being almost meaningless. But in reality, it is a precise concept. It means that the body is receiving all the major components it requires: proteins, healthy fats, complex carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals in the right proportions. Not in excess, not in deficiency, but in balance. As we age, this balance becomes more critical because the body loses its ability to compensate for imbalance. In earlier years, you could lean heavily on one type of food and still function reasonably well. But after 60, the absence of even one essential component begins to show itself more clearly. Energy levels fluctuate, muscle mass declines, cognitive sharpness may diminish, and recovery becomes slower. Let's take protein, for example. It is not just about building muscle in the traditional sense. It is about preserving what you already have. Without sufficient protein, the body gradually loses strength, making even simple tasks more difficult over time. Then there are healthy fats, often misunderstood, sometimes avoided unnecessarily, which play a vital role in brain health, hormone regulation, and inflammation control. And carbohydrates, when chosen correctly in their whole, unrefined forms, provide sustained energy rather than sudden spikes and crashes. But beyond the individual components, there is a deeper principle at work. Balance is not only biological, it is philosophical. It reflects a way of thinking about life that resists extremes. Many people approach food with an all-or-nothing mindset, strict control followed by indulgence, discipline followed by neglect. This pattern becomes increasingly harmful with age because the body thrives on consistency, not fluctuation. A balanced diet, therefore, is not just about what is on your plate. It is about how you relate to food over time. It encourages stability. It promotes rhythm. It aligns your daily choices with long-term outcomes. And this consistency is what ultimately sustains health. There is also a psychological benefit to balance that is often overlooked. When the diet is well structured and complete, the body feels satisfied. Cravings decrease, energy stabilizes, and the constant mental negotiation around food begins to fade. You are no longer reacting impulsively to hunger or desire. You are operating from a place of control and understanding. And this brings us to an important realization. Discipline in nutrition is not about restriction, it is about alignment. It is about ensuring that your daily intake reflects your long-term goals. It is about recognizing that strength, mobility, and independence in later years are not accidental. They are the result of repeated balanced choices. We should also acknowledge that balance does not mean rigidity. It allows for flexibility, for enjoyment, for cultural and personal preferences. But within that flexibility, there is an underlying structure that remains intact. You are not abandoning balance, you are working within it. Over time, this approach creates a form of quiet resilience. The body becomes more stable, more responsive, and more capable of handling the natural challenges that come with aging. And perhaps more importantly, you develop a sense of trust in your own habits. You know that what you are doing day after day is supporting your well-being rather than undermining it. Because in the end, a balanced diet is not simply about combining different types of food. It is about creating a consistent foundation for strength, clarity, and longevity. And the question you are left with is simple but profound. Are your daily choices in balance with the life you still want to live? Once we understand the importance of balance, we have to look more closely at one element within that balance that becomes increasingly decisive after 60, and that is protein. Not in the exaggerated commercialized sense we often hear about, but in its fundamental role as the preserver of strength. There is a quiet process that begins as we age, one that many people do not immediately notice. The body gradually loses muscle mass, a condition that develops subtly over time. It doesn't announce itself dramatically, it shows up in smaller ways. Reduced grip strength, slower movement, difficulty standing for long periods, a general sense that the body is not as capable as it once was, and by the time it becomes obvious, it has already progressed significantly. Protein plays a central role in resisting this decline. It provides the building blocks the body needs not just to build muscle, but to maintain and repair it. After 60, this maintenance becomes more important than growth. The goal is not to become stronger than you were in your youth, but to preserve as much functional strength as possible for as long as possible. But here is where many people miscalculate. They assume that their lifelong eating habits already include enough protein. In reality, the body's efficiency in processing protein decreases with age. This means that the same intake that once sufficed may no longer be adequate. The requirement does not necessarily double, but it becomes more deliberate. It requires attention. And again, this is not just a biological issue, it is a psychological one. Protein-rich foods are often less convenient. They require planning, preparation, and sometimes a shift in taste preference. It is easier to rely on carbohydrates or processed foods that provide quick satisfaction, but easy choices repeated over time lead to difficult outcomes. There is also a deeper philosophical point here. Muscle is not merely about physical appearance, it is about capability. It is about the ability to carry your own weight, literally and metaphorically, to stand, to move, to remain independent. In that sense, maintaining muscle through adequate protein intake is not just a health decision. It is a statement about how you choose to live your later years. And what is often overlooked is the cumulative effect of small, consistent choices, including a source of protein in each meal, whether it is eggs, legumes, dairy, fish, or lean meats, does not seem significant in isolation, but over weeks and months, it creates a protective effect. It slows down muscle loss, supports recovery, and stabilizes energy levels. There is also an important connection between protein and overall metabolic health. Adequate protein intake helps regulate appetite, reducing the tendency to overeat less nutritious foods. It contributes to a more stable internal environment where the body is not constantly fluctuating between energy highs and lows. This stability, once established, becomes a foundation for other healthy habits. At the same time, it is important to approach this with clarity rather than excess. More is not always better. The goal is not to overload the body, but to meet its needs with precision. This requires awareness, understanding how much protein your body requires, and ensuring that your diet consistently meets that requirement. And when this awareness is developed, something shifts. You begin to see protein not as an optional component of your diet, but as a central pillar of your strength. It becomes part of a larger strategy, one that is aligned with your goal of maintaining independence, mobility, and resilience. Because ultimately, strength after 60 is not preserved by chance. It is preserved by intention. And protein, in its quiet and consistent way, becomes one of the most powerful tools in that effort. So the question is not whether you are eating enough, it is whether you are eating in a way that protects your ability to stand strong in the years ahead. There is another element of health that is so simple, so ordinary, that it is often ignored, and that is hydration. It does not carry the same attention as diet plans or nutritional strategies, yet its absence can quietly undermine everything we have discussed so far. As the body ages, one of the less obvious changes is a reduced sense of thirst. You no longer feel the same urgency to drink water, even when your body needs it. This creates a subtle but persistent problem. You are not intentionally neglecting hydration. You are simply unaware of its absence. And over time, that absence begins to affect the body in ways that are easy to misinterpret. Fatigue, for instance, is often attributed to age itself. A person feels low in energy, assumes it is a natural consequence of getting older, and adjusts their expectations accordingly. But in many cases, the issue is far more basic. The body is underhydrated. Its systems are not functioning at optimal levels, and the result is a general sense of sluggishness. The same applies to digestion, joint comfort, and even mental clarity. Water is not just a passive element in the body, it is actively involved in nearly every physiological process. It supports circulation, regulates temperature, aids in nutrient absorption, and helps remove waste. When hydration is insufficient, these processes become less efficient, not abruptly, but gradually. And this gradual decline is what makes the issue so deceptive. There is no dramatic signal, no immediate consequence that forces attention. Instead, there is a slow erosion of well-being. A stiffness that lingers a little longer, a thought process that feels slightly less sharp, a recovery that takes more time than it should. From a psychological perspective, hydration also reflects a broader pattern of awareness. We tend to prioritize what feels urgent and visible, while neglecting what is consistent and foundational. Drinking water does not feel like a significant act. It does not provide immediate gratification or a sense of accomplishment, and so it is easily overlooked. But this is precisely where discipline becomes meaningful, not in the dramatic decisions, but in the quiet, repeated actions that no one notices. Choosing to drink water regularly, even when you are not thirsty, is an example of that discipline. It is a decision to act based on understanding rather than impulse. There is also a philosophical dimension to this. Hydration, in its simplicity, reminds us that health is often sustained by the most basic habits. Not everything requires complexity. Not everything needs optimization or innovation. Sometimes the most powerful changes come from respecting what is fundamental, and when you begin to treat hydration with intention, the effects become noticeable. Energy stabilizes, the body feels lighter, more responsive, joints move with greater ease. Even the mind benefits. There is a clarity that emerges when the body is properly supported. It is also worth recognizing that hydration is not only about water in isolation, but about consistency over time. Drinking large amounts occasionally does not compensate for regular neglect. The body responds best to steady input, a rhythm that it can rely on. This brings us back to a central idea that runs through everything we've discussed: awareness. Health after 60 is not accidental. It is the result of paying attention to details that were once easy to ignore, and hydration is one of those details. Simple, but essential. Because in the end, it is often not the absence of advanced solutions that weakens the body, but the neglect of basic ones. And the question you must ask yourself is this: if something as simple as water can sustain your strength, why would you leave it to chance? As we move further into this discussion, it becomes necessary to confront a reality that many people prefer to keep at a distance: the relationship between what we eat and the diseases we fear. Conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and bone loss are often spoken about as if they are inevitable, as if they arrive with age regardless of our choices. But that assumption is not entirely accurate. While age may increase vulnerability, it is our daily habits that often determine the direction that vulnerability takes. What we eat consistently and over time shapes the internal environment of the body. It influences inflammation, blood sugar regulation, cholesterol levels, and even the strength of our bones. These are not abstract concepts. They are measurable processes that respond directly to the quality of our nutrition. And perhaps more importantly, they respond predictably. There's a tendency to think of disease as something sudden, a diagnosis that appears at a particular moment. But in reality, most chronic conditions develop gradually. They are the result of years, sometimes decades of accumulated choices. Small imbalances, repeated daily, eventually become significant enough to manifest as illness. This is where the power of nutrition becomes clear. It operates quietly, often unnoticed, but with remarkable consistency. A diet high in processed foods, excessive sugar, and unhealthy fats creates a state of chronic stress within the body. Inflammation increases, metabolic processes become unstable, and over time, this instability lays the groundwork for disease. On the other hand, a diet centered on whole, nutrient-dense foods works in the opposite direction. It stabilizes blood sugar, supports cardiovascular health, strengthens bones, and reduces inflammation. It does not guarantee immunity from illness, nothing does, but it significantly shifts the probability in your favor. There is also a psychological aspect to this that deserves attention. Many people approach health reactively. They wait for a problem to appear and then attempt to correct it. But by that point, the body is already under strain. Preventive care requires a different mindset, one that values foresight over convenience. This is not always easy because prevention does not offer immediate rewards. You do not feel the absence of disease in the same way you feel relief from it. And so, the motivation must come from understanding rather than experience. It requires you to act today based on what you know will matter tomorrow. There is also a deeper philosophical point here. Taking responsibility for your health is, in many ways, an assertion of control over your future. It is a refusal to accept decline as inevitable, not in a naive or unrealistic sense, but in a measured, informed way. You are not denying the realities of aging. You are choosing to engage with them intelligently, and this engagement changes the narrative. Instead of viewing later life as a period defined by limitation, it becomes a phase that can still be shaped, influenced, and improved. Nutrition becomes one of the primary tools in that effort, not because it is dramatic, but because it is consistent. We should also be clear that this is not about fear. It is not about constantly worrying about what might go wrong. It is about understanding that your daily choices have long-term consequences and using that understanding to make better decisions. It is about shifting from passive acceptance to active participation in your own well-being. Over time, this approach builds a form of quiet confidence. You may not control everything, but you know you are doing what you can. And that sense of agency is in itself a powerful contributor to overall health, because ultimately the goal is not just to avoid disease, but to create a life where the risk of it is minimized through consistent, thoughtful action. And the question that remains is both simple and profound. Are your daily choices protecting your future or slowly compromising it? If we step back and look at everything we've discussed, nutrition, balance, protein, hydration, disease prevention, we begin to see a larger pattern emerging. None of these elements exist in isolation. They are interconnected, reinforcing one another, and ultimately shaping something far more significant than physical health alone. They shape the quality of your life. And this is where the conversation reaches its most important point, because the goal is not simply to live longer. Longevity by itself is not the achievement. The real question is, how are you living those years? Are you independent? Are you mobile? Are you mentally sharp, emotionally stable, and physically capable of engaging with the world around you? Healthy eating, when practiced consistently, directly influences all of these dimensions. It affects how you move, how you think, how you feel, and how you experience your daily life. It determines whether you approach each day with energy and clarity or with fatigue and limitation. There is also a psychological transformation that occurs when healthy habits become part of your routine. You begin to feel a sense of control, not in an obsessive or rigid way, but in a grounded, stable manner. You are no longer reacting to your body's weaknesses. You are supporting its strengths. That shift in perspective is subtle but powerful. And it extends beyond the physical. When the body is well supported, the mind follows. Clarity improves. Decision-making becomes sharper. Emotional resilience increases. You are better equipped to handle stress, to engage in meaningful relationships, and to remain present in your life. These are not secondary benefits. They are central to what it means to live well. There is also a deeper philosophical dimension to this idea of quality of life. As we age, our priorities naturally begin to shift. The urgency of achievement gives way to the value of experience. Independence becomes more meaningful. Simplicity becomes more appealing. And in that context, health is no longer something we take for granted. It becomes something we actively protect. Healthy eating, then, is not a restriction imposed on your life. It is a support system that allows you to live the life you value. It enables you to maintain your routines, your relationships, your sense of identity. It allows you to continue being who you are rather than gradually surrendering that to physical limitation. But this requires consistency, not perfection, not extremes, but steady, deliberate choices made over time. It is the accumulation of small decisions, what you eat, how you hydrate, how you balance your meals, that ultimately defines your trajectory. And perhaps the most important realization is this: quality of life is not determined at a single moment. It is built daily, quietly, repeatedly, often without immediate recognition. But over time, those daily choices either expand your capacity to live well or they slowly reduce it. So when we talk about being strong, even after 60, we are not just referring to physical strength. We are talking about a broader form of strength, the ability to remain engaged, capable, and present in your own life. And that strength is not given. It is built. Because in the end, the life you experience tomorrow is being shaped by the choices you make today. And the question you must carry with you is this: are your habits supporting the life you want to continue living, or quietly taking it away from you?